Have you ever walked through a vintage motorcycle show and wondered about those bikes nobody seems to remember? You know, the ones tucked in the corner while everyone crowds around the CB 750s and Z1s? Well, what if I told you that some of the best motorcycles of the 1970s were actually commercial flops? Machines that were too weird, too advanced, or just too different for their time. Today we're counting down 10 forgotten motorcycles from the 70s that were actually brilliant. And trust me, number 1 will make you question everything you thought you knew about motorcycle history. So buckle up and hit that subscribe button, because this is going to be one wild ride. Number 10. Benelli 750 Se. Picture this. It's 1974. The motorcycle world is dominated by fours. Honda's CB 750 is king. Kawasaki's Z1 just changed everything. And then some crazy Italians decide to stuff 6 cylinders into a road bike. Not just any 6 cylinders either. We're talking about a transverse inline-six like a miniature Ferrari engine sitting sideways in a motorcycle frame. The Benelli 750 Se wasn't just ambitious, it was insane. Here's what made it brilliant though. This thing was smoother than silk pajamas on a waterbed. While everyone else was dealing with vibrating parallel twins and buzzy fours, Benelli created something that felt like it was powered by turbines. The engine was actually based on 4 Honda CB 504 cylinders with 2 extra pots grafted on. Cheeky? Sure, but it worked. The whole package was gorgeously finished too. Italian-style meeting Japanese reliability in a way nobody had seen before. The exhaust system alone was a work of art, 6 individual pipes snaking under the engine like chrome spaghetti. The sound? Imagine a Formula 1 car from the 60s crossed with a sewing machine. It was bizarre, it was wonderful, it was completely unique. At 71 horsepower, it wasn't the most powerful bike around, but power wasn't the point. This was about engineering excellence and doing something nobody else dared to try. So why did it fail? Well, timing is everything. Honda released their CBX with its 6 cylinders just a few years later, and it had more power, better marketing, and Honda's dealer network behind it. The Benelli was also expensive, really expensive, like buying a small car expensive. Plus, try explaining to your buddies in 1974 why you need 6 cylinders when 4 seems to work just fine. Most riders just didn't get it. But here's the thing, the 750 Se was a masterpiece of engineering ambition. It proved that more cylinders could mean more refinement, not just more power. It showed that Italian manufacturers could play in the big leagues with the Japanese, and it paved the way for every exotic multi-cylinder bike that came after. Today, finding one is like discovering buried treasure. They're rare, they're valuable, and they're finally getting the recognition they deserved all along. Number 9. Suzuki RE Five. Okay, let's talk about the weirdest production motorcycle Suzuki ever made. The RE Five. This is a bike that shouldn't exist. In 1974, while everyone else was perfecting piston engines, Suzuki decided to shove a Wankel rotary engine into a motorcycle. Yes, the same kind of engine Mazda was putting in RX cars. The same engine that NSU was experimenting with in Germany. Suzuki looked at this spinning triangle of mechanical complexity and thought, yeah, let's put this in a bike. The styling came from Giugiaro, the same guy who designed the DeLorean and countless stunning Italian cars. And it showed. The RE5 looked like it teleported in from the future. The instrument cluster was housed in a cylinder that rotated to reveal the gauges. The taillight looked like a torpedo. The whole thing screamed space age at a time when most bikes still looked like they rolled out of the 50s. But here's where it gets really interesting. The rotary engine was turbine smooth. No pistons pumping up and down, no valves clattering. Just this constant whooshing power delivery that felt completely alien. It was like riding an electric bike 40 years before electric bikes were cool. The torque was everywhere. You could lug it down to nothing and it would just pull, and pull, and pull. The problems? Oh boy, where do we start? First, it drank fuel like an alcoholic at an open bar. We're talking 15 miles per gallon if you were gentle, which you wouldn't be, because the thing begged to be revved. Second, it was heavy, really heavy, 530 pounds heavy. Third, nobody understood rotary engines. Dealers couldn't fix them, mechanics were terrified of them, and riders didn't trust them. Suzuki only made the RE5 for 2 years. They lost a fortune on it. But you know what? The bikes that survived are bulletproof. The rotary engine, once you figure out its quirks, is actually incredibly reliable. There's barely anything to go wrong. No valve adjustments, no cam chains. Just keep the oil topped up, and these things run forever. Today, the RE5 is a cult classic. It's a reminder that Suzuki once threw caution to the wind and built something nobody asked for, but everyone should have appreciated. It was brilliant. It was bonkers. It was a complete commercial disaster. And that's exactly why we love it. Number 8, Hercules W 2000. Now, this is obscure. The Hercules W 2000. Ever heard of it? Didn't think so. This was the world's first mass-produced Wankel rotary motorcycle, beating Suzuki's RE Five to market. It came from Germany, built by Hercules, who were actually DKW in disguise, using a Sachs rotary engine. If that sounds complicated, that's because it was. Here's what made it special. While Suzuki went big and heavy with their rotary, Hercules kept things simple. The W2000 was basically a regular motorcycle with a rotary engine dropped in. No fancy Giugiaro styling, no rotating instrument pods. Just a basic, honest motorcycle that happened to have a spinning triangle making the power. The engine made 27 horsepower. Not much, right? But here's the thing about rotary power. It's different. It's smooth, it's linear, there's no power band to speak of. Just twist and go. The W2000 felt like a much bigger bike than it was. It would cruise all day at 70 miles per hour without breaking a sweat. Try that on a conventional two-stroke of the era and you'd scatter engine parts across 3 counties. What really set it apart was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. While 2-strokes screamed and 4-strokes thumped, the Hercules just hummed. It sounded like a turbine, like something from a science fiction movie. Riders didn't know what to make of it. Was it broken? Was it supposed to sound like that? Even at full throttle, it was quieter than most bikes at idle. The W2000 was actually pretty successful, at least by rotary motorcycle standards. They made about 1,800 of them between 1974 and 1977. That might not sound like much, but remember, Suzuki only sold about 5,000 RE5s globally. For a small German company with a weird engine nobody understood, that's not bad at all. Today, finding a W2000 is like finding a unicorn. A German, rotary-powered unicorn. They're out there, but good luck tracking one down. When you do find one, they're surprisingly usable. The simplicity that seemed boring in the 70s now seems refreshing. No complexity, no unnecessary flash, just a rotary engine doing its thing in the most straightforward way possible. Sometimes boring is brilliant. Number 7, Moto Morini 3.5 Sport. Imagine you're in Italy in 1973. The world is going crazy for big bikes, 750s, 900s, liters, and then Moto Morini releases a 344cc V-twin and calls it a sport bike. That's not even 350cc, it's 3.5. The motorcycle press laughed, riders scoffed. Who wants a bike that small when you can have twice the displacement for barely more money? Well, as it turns out, Moto Morini was onto something. The 3.5 Sport was a giant killer. It weighed nothing, 330 pounds wet. That's lighter than most modern 300s. The V-twin engine used Heron heads, which sounds fancy, but basically meant the combustion chambers were in the pistons, not the heads. This made the engine incredibly fuel efficient. We're talking 60 miles per gallon while riding it hard, but here's the real magic. This thing handled like it was on rails. The frame was designed by Franco Lambertini, the same genius who would later create Ducati's legendary trellis frames. The suspension was basic but perfectly matched to the bike's weight. The riding position was aggressive, but comfortable. Everything just worked together in perfect harmony. On a twisty road, the 3.5 would embarrass bikes with 3 times the power. It carried so much corner speed that bigger bikes couldn't catch up on the straights before the next corner arrived. It was like riding a scalpel while everyone else was swinging sledgehammers. Precise, delicate, absolutely devastating in the right hands. The engine was a jewel too. It revved to 8,500 RPM, which was astronomical for a V-twin in the 70s. It made 39 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much until you remember how light the bike was. The power-to-weight ratio was actually better than many bigger bikes. And the sound. Oh, the sound. It was like an angry sewing machine crossed with a race car. Completely distinctive, Moto Morini sold these for 5 years and they developed a cult following among riders who understood what they were. This wasn't about bragging rights at the bar. This was about the pure joy of riding. Today, they're highly sought after by collectors who appreciate engineering excellence over raw numbers. The 3.5 Sport proved that bigger isn't always better. Sometimes, perfect is just 3.5. Number 6, Bimota SB Two. 1977. While the rest of the motorcycle world was building bikes and then figuring out how to make them handle, a small Italian company called Bimota decided to flip the script. They started with the chassis and then figured out what engine to put in it. The result was the SB Two, and it was basically a doctorate degree in motorcycle dynamics wrapped in fiberglass and aluminum. Bimota took Suzuki's GS750 engine, which was a good but not spectacular motor, and built the most advanced chassis in motorcycling around it. We're talking about a frame that weighed less than 20 pounds. The whole bike was 100 pounds lighter than the donor Suzuki. That's like taking a person off the passenger seat. The geometry was radical for the time. Steep steering angle, short wheelbase, minimal trail. Everything the Japanese were afraid to try. The bodywork was pure pornography for gearheads, hand-laid fiberglass that looked like it belonged in an art museum. The fuel tank was aluminum, shaped by hand. The exhausts were works of art. Even the foot pegs were beautifully machined. This wasn't just a motorcycle, it was functional sculpture. Only 140 were ever made, and each one was basically hand-built by craftsmen who probably sang opera while they worked. On the track, the SB2 was untouchable. It won races straight out of the box. Privateer racers on SB2s were beating factory teams with 10 times the budget. The handling was so far ahead of anything else that journalists ran out of superlatives. One magazine called it telepathic, another said it defied physics. They weren't exaggerating. The thing is, the SB2 showed everyone what was possible. It proved that chassis design was just as important as engine power. It demonstrated that weight was the enemy of performance. It established principles that every modern sport bike still follows. Today's GSXRs, CBRs, and ZXRs all owe something to this weird little Italian that most people have never heard of. Finding an SB2 today is like finding the Holy Grail. They trade for six figures when they come up for sale, which is almost never. But here's the crazy part, they're still competitive. A well-set-up SB2 can still embarrass modern bikes on a track. 47 years later, that's not just brilliant, that's prophetic. Number 5, Yamaha XS 750 and 850. Okay, nobody talks about these bikes anymore, but Yamaha's XS triples were engineering marvels hiding in plain sight. Launched in 1976, the XS 750 was Yamaha's answer to a question nobody was asking. How do you make a 3-cylinder engine smooth? The answer involved a 120-degree crank that gave perfect primary balance, no vibration, just smooth, turbine-like power delivery. But Yamaha didn't stop there. They gave it shaft drive. In the 70s, shaft drive was like cruise control and heated grips rolled into one. No chain maintenance, no mess, no adjustment. Just ride and forget. They also gave it double overhead cams when most bikes were still using push rods or single cams. This was high-tech stuff disguised as a touring bike. The 750 made 64 horsepower, which was respectable but not earth-shattering. But the way it delivered that power was completely different from anything else. The triple configuration gave it the smooth power of a 4 with the character of a twin. It had this elastic, torquey feel that made it perfect for real-world riding. You didn't need to rev it, it just pulled from anywhere. Then, in 1980, Yamaha bored it out to 850. More torque, more smoothness, even better. But by then, the world had moved on to inline 4s and V-twins. Triples were seen as weird. Neither fish nor fowl. Sales were disappointing, and Yamaha killed the line after just 5 years. Here's what everyone missed though. These bikes were bulletproof. The shaft drive lasted forever. The engines were under-stressed and over-engineered. You can find XS triples today with 200,000 miles on them, still running like new. They're the cockroaches of the motorcycle world. Nuclear war could happen, and XS triples would still be running. And they're cheap. Stupidly cheap. You can buy a perfect XS 850 for the price of a used Ninja 400. It's faster, smoother, more comfortable, and it'll probably outlive you. The only downside is that nobody at bike night will know what it is, but maybe that's part of the appeal. The XS triples were brilliant bikes that nobody noticed then, and nobody remembers now. Your loss, everyone else. Number 4, Kawasaki Z650. 1976 was a weird year for Kawasaki. They had the Z900, which was a monster. They had the Z1, which was legendary. And then they released the Z650, which was perfect. Yeah, nobody expected that either. This was supposed to be the economy model. The bike for people who couldn't afford the big ones. Instead, Kawasaki accidentally built one of the best balanced motorcycles of the decade. The Z650 was everything the bigger bikes were, just scaled down perfectly. 652cc inline 4. Double overhead cams, 4 carburetors, 5-speed gearbox. It made 64 horsepower, which was plenty for a bike that weighed just 460 pounds. But numbers don't tell the whole story here. This bike had something special. It handled, really handled. While the Z1 and Z900 were freight trains that needed wrestling around corners, the Z650 just flowed. The steering was light but stable. The suspension actually worked. The brakes could actually stop it. Motorcycle journalists of the time were shocked. Several magazines said they'd rather have the 650 than the 900. That's like saying you'd rather have a BMW 3 Series than a 7 Series. Heresy. The engine was a sweetheart too. It revved freely to 9,000 RPM without the brutal power delivery of the bigger bikes. It was smooth, refined, and had this addictive quality that made you want to rev it just to hear it sing. The exhaust note was pure 1970s inline-4. Part Formula 1, part vacuum cleaner, all awesome. But here's the really clever part. The Z650 was cheap to buy, cheap to run, and cheap to insure. You could actually afford to ride this thing every day. Try that with a Z1 and you'd go bankrupt just keeping it in tires and chains. The 650 was practical performance before anyone invented that term. Today everyone wants the Z1 or Z900. They've become icons, collector pieces that rarely get ridden. Meanwhile, Z650s are out there being used as intended: daily riders, weekend scratchers, honest motorcycles for honest riders. You can still find clean ones for reasonable money, and they're still brilliant to ride. The Z650 proved that sometimes the middle child is actually the favorite. It just takes everyone else 40 years to figure it out. Number 3, OSSA Yankee 500Z. This might be the weirdest success story in motorcycling. An American-designed, Spanish-built two-stroke twin that was sold through a company nobody had heard of. The OSSA Yankee 500Z shouldn't have worked. Everything about it was wrong. But somehow, it became one of the most capable trail bikes of the early 70s. The story starts with an American named John Taylor who designed a 500cc two-stroke twin and couldn't find anyone to build it. He ended up partnering with OSSA in Spain, who were known for small trials bikes. They agreed to build his engine if he agreed to sell their other bikes in America. It was a match made in desperation. The 500Z was unlike any other two-stroke of its time. Instead of being peaky and pipey like most two-strokes, it had massive, tractor-like torque. It would pull from idle to redline without hesitation. You could lug it through trails at walking speed or blast across desert at 70. The power delivery was so un-two-stroke-like that riders didn't believe it was a two-stroke until they saw the expansion chambers. The chassis was equally unusual. Long travel suspension when everyone else was still using short travel conventional forks. A chromalite frame that was both light and strong. Fiberglass bodywork that wouldn't rust or dent. Spanish electrics that actually worked, unlike British or Italian ones. It was like someone took all the best ideas from different countries and mashed them together. On the trail, the Yankee was devastating. It had the grunt to climb anything, the suspension to soak up anything, and the handling to dodge anything. It won races, it won enduro championships. It made established brands look silly. DKW, Husqvarna, and Bultaco owners couldn't believe they were being beaten by something called a Yankee. Production only lasted from 1971 to 1973. Maybe 2,000 were made total. The partnership fell apart, as partnerships do. But those 2,000 bikes developed a reputation for being indestructible. The engines were simple and robust. The chassis were overbuilt. These things just didn't break. Today, finding a Yankee 500Z is like finding Bigfoot. They're out there, but nobody agrees on where. When one does surface, it usually still runs. 40 plus years later, still running. That's not normal for a two-stroke. That's not normal for anything. The Yankee proved that good engineering transcends borders, brands, and common sense. Sometimes, the weird ones are the best ones. Number 2. Husqvarna 390 CR 1977. Motocross was exploding in America. Everyone wanted to be Bob Hanna or Roger DeCoster. The Japanese were throwing money and technology at racing. And then this little Swedish company called Husqvarna showed up with the 390 CR and quietly dominated everything. The 390 CR was not the bike you'd expect to win. It didn't have the most power. It didn't have trick suspension. It didn't have factory backing in America. What it had was perfect balance. The engine was a 389cc two-stroke single that made around 40 horsepower. Not mind-blowing. But it made that power exactly where you needed it, right in the middle of the rev range where you actually ride. The chassis was the real magic though. Husqvarna had been building off-road bikes since the turn of the century. They knew things about handling that the Japanese were just figuring out. The CR's frame was chrome moly steel, hand-welded by craftsmen who'd been doing it for decades. The geometry was perfect, not too steep, not too lazy, just right. Swedish build quality was something else entirely. This wasn't mass production, this was craftsmanship. Every weld was perfect, every bolt was exactly torqued. The fit and finish made Japanese bikes look agricultural. The tank was hand-formed aluminum, the seat was real leather, even the grips were higher quality than everyone else's. On the track, the 390CR was a scalpel. While riders on bigger, more powerful bikes were fighting for control, CR riders were flowing. The bike did exactly what you wanted, when you wanted it. It turned without drama, it jumped without surprise, it landed without breaking your spine. Heikki Mikkola won the World Championship on one, Privateers won national championships on them, the bike just worked. The thing is, Husqvarna only made about 2,000 of these worldwide. They were expensive. Really expensive, and dealership support in America was basically non-existent. You had to really want one to own one. Most people bought Yamahas or Suzukis instead. Cheaper, easier to find parts, good enough. But good enough wasn't perfect. The 390CR was perfect. It was the pinnacle of 70s motocross engineering. Today, collectors pay insane money for clean examples. Vintage racers still win on them. 50 years later, they're still competitive. That's not nostalgia talking. That's engineering excellence that transcends time. The 390CR wasn't just brilliant, it was perfect. And perfection never goes out of style. Number 1, Kawasaki KZ1300. And here we are, the forgotten masterpiece. The bike that should have changed everything, but instead became a footnote. The Kawasaki KZ1300. If you've never heard of it, don't feel bad. Most people haven't, but this was the most technologically advanced motorcycle of the 1970s, and it bombed so hard that Kawasaki pretended it never existed. 1979. The world was in crisis, oil embargo, economic recession, the motorcycle boom was ending, and Kawasaki decided this was the perfect time to release a liquid-cooled inline six-cylinder shaft-drive touring bike. It was either brave or insane. Probably both. Let's talk about this engine. 1,286cc, 6 cylinders. Liquid cooling when everyone else was using air. Double overhead cams. It made 120 horsepower, which was supercar territory in 1979. But power wasn't the point. This engine was about smoothness, refinement, technology. It was like Kawasaki looked at Honda's CBX and said, "That's cute. Watch this." The liquid cooling wasn't just for show, it meant consistent performance regardless of weather. No overheating in traffic, no cold seizures in winter, the engine stayed at optimal temperature all the time. The shaft drive meant no maintenance. The 6 cylinders meant turbine smoothness. This was the future of motorcycling. The touring equipment was equally impressive. Full fairing, hard bags, cruise control. Yes, cruise control in 1979, AM/FM stereo, a clock, gauges for everything. And this wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a two-wheeled Cadillac. It weighed 650 pounds, but when you're crossing continents, who cares? So why did it fail? Timing. The KZ1300 arrived just as the motorcycle market collapsed. It was expensive, monumentally expensive. It was complex, dealers couldn't work on it. And it was too advanced. Riders didn't trust liquid cooling, they didn't understand why they needed 6 cylinders, they didn't want a motorcycle that was smarter than they were. Kawasaki killed it after just 1 year, maybe 3,000 were made worldwide. They lost a fortune on every single one. It became the bike nobody talked about. The CBX got all the glory, the Goldwing got all the sales, the KZ1300 got forgotten. But here's the thing, the ones that survived are incredible. The liquid cooling means the engines will last forever. The shaft drive means no maintenance headaches. The build quality was exceptional because Kawasaki was trying to prove a point. These bikes routinely go 300,000 miles without major work. Try that with any air-cooled bike from the 70s. Today, finding a KZ1300 is like finding a time machine. It's a glimpse into a future that never happened, a world where motorcycles were sophisticated, refined, and advanced. It was brilliant, it was revolutionary, it was a complete commercial disaster, and that's exactly why it's number 1 on our list. And there you have it, that's 10 forgotten motorcycles from the 1970s that were actually brilliant. Each one of these bikes tried something different, something bold, something that the market just wasn't ready for. Which one surprised you the most? Did you own any of these back in the day? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I know some of you have tales to tell. If you enjoyed this deep dive into motorcycling's forgotten gems, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the bikes that time forgot. Ring that notification bell too, and we'll see you next time.